Hi everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the Shimmerz Paints April Color Kits collection. I was in the mood to try out some dies that I hadn't used in the past, and I realized that I ordered these dies because I really like the shape of them. These are Spellbinders dies. It was a whole set of nested dies, and I'll put the information that I have about it in the description box in case you are interested. And so I picked out two of the dies. One is just slightly smaller than the other. Using the slightly smaller die, I cut out one shape from the pattern paper and one shape from white cardstock. And then using the slightly larger die, I cut out a piece from white cardstock. So I layered them together with the slightly larger white cardstock shape on the bottom. And then on top of that, I put the slightly smaller white cardstock shape and then the pattern paper piece on the very top. And this created a little bit of dimension. I didn't go crazy with the dimension, but I do like to have a little bit of dimension. And then I also like the way there was a white border around all the shapes. I always think that helps them to stand out. Before I attached the layers together, though, I used some Distress Oxides just to ink the edges of the pattern papers. I used Fossilized Amber, that's a yellowish color, Mowed Lawn, that's a green color, and also Stormy Sky, that's a bluish color. I used my ATG adhesive to attach the layers together. I always think that's the easiest way to attach things together, but of course other adhesives could be used. And I wanted to get a variety of the different pattern papers into this layout. I don't end up using this particular green shape that you see right here. There was just one of them, and I decided that I didn't want to include the one green shape, but I did include all of the other shapes on this layout. So I wasn't sure if I was going to have my geometric shapes going horizontally or vertically. I kind of like the way they look vertically here, but in the end I decided that I was going to use them horizontally on the page, so I decided that I was going to put some mixed media behind it. And this is my favorite part of the creation process. I love creating the mixed media background. Here I'm using a Shimmerz paint called Orange Sherbet, and then I use the packaging technique, spreading a little bit of it onto a piece of plastic and spraying some water onto it. And I just happened to have a fan brush handy, so I decided to just use that. I was able to use the fan brush to create a little bit of extra texture. Not really sure if it's noticeable in the final product, but I always like to try different things out. At first, I was thinking that I didn't want the paint to go all the way to the edge of the paper on either side. So I started out by just putting the color toward the top, kind of in the middle of the paper. And then I also knew that I wanted to add a title at the bottom, so I added another smaller area of color at the bottom. Shimmerz Paints makes a lot of different types of paints. The one that I'm using right now is called Shimmerz, and it comes in little jars, and it's very concentrated. So I find that I can add a lot of water to it, and that helps it to spread around. And then to build up the color, make it a little bit more intense, I like to add multiple layers of color. Of course, I could choose not to add so much water to it, but I like the idea of adding layers of color to make the color intense rather than just putting a lot of paint on all at once. That's just my process. I'm sure there are other ways of doing it. So this is just the very beginning layer. And I should mention that I am using a piece of gessoed 120-pound smooth white cardstock. This is my standard paper that I like to create my mixed media backgrounds on. So as some of you may know, I haven't been as active with my scrapbooking lately as I was in the past. I went through a stage, I had a number of things that I was dealing with in my house, one of them being some water damage. That was not fun. We're almost done dealing with that. I also have some home improvements that I've been working on. And of course, even though we hired people to do the home improvements, there's still always so much that has to be done by us. The preparation, and then afterwards the painting and the finishing things off. So those improvements are things that have been such a long time coming. I have a lot of things in my house that really needed to be addressed. And then in addition to all of that, I was feeling like I needed a little bit of a break from scrapbooking every single day. I love scrapbooking. I plan on doing scrapbooking for the rest of my life, but I just needed a little bit of time away from creating the videos and the content constantly. I feel so much better now that I've had a little bit of a break. Of course, I still continue to do my Shimmerz layouts and Shimmerz videos and a number of other hops that I'm a part of, but I'm feeling like I'm back now. I think I have my mojo back again, and I'm really excited to put out some more videos. So hopefully I will have lots to show you on my channel very soon. So now this is when I'm using my fan brush to create a little bit of texture. I also watered down the paint a little bit more than it was, and I created some splatters. I feel like the splatters add so much to the mixed media backgrounds. And then I didn't want to add a whole bunch of different colors to the background because I have so many different pattern papers that are represented on my shapes. So I thought that just using the orange would be a nice contrast with all of these colors. And here, when I placed the shapes on the background, I could see that I had to add a little bit more color just so you'd be able to see the color on the top of the shapes, on the bottom of the shapes, and around them. And so I'm adding a little bit more of the orange sherbet in a number of places. And then this is where I decided that since the shapes are going to go from one side to the other side, that I should extend the color from one edge of the paper to the other edge of the paper. However, I still keep it away from the very top of the paper. There were a couple of places in the background where there was just a little bit too much splatter where I didn't want it. I usually don't worry too much about splatters going in various places, but whenever that happens, whenever there's color that I want to either dull down or get rid of, I'll use a paper towel or a wipe that's in my stash, and I will wipe some of the color away. And that's really easy to do when you add gesso to the background. If you don't add gesso, there are other benefits, but you can't go back and remove things because there's nothing between the paint and the paper, and so the paint immediately gets soaked into the paper. Now I'm adding a little bit of texture to my area of color, and to do this I'm using some Staz On Ink. The color is called Pumpkin, and a couple of different stamps that I have in my stash. I love grid stamps, and I also love combining different types of stamps. So I started off with the grid stamp, and then I went back in with some dots, and then I added a little bit more texture by using a crackle stamp. I like to have a number of stamps handy that I use on a lot of backgrounds. I also have some type stamps. I feel like those are great on lots of backgrounds. And then I also have a number of different dot stamps. Some are a little bigger, some are a little smaller, and I like having those to choose from when I'm making backgrounds. I wanted to add some modeling paste, but I wanted it to be very subtle. So I'm using this stencil from A Colorful Life. This is a stencil that I have started using quite frequently, and the stencil is called Grunge Dot. The dots in this stencil are very, very small, so they just add a little bit of something to the background, but they're not super, super noticeable in the final product. I just think all these things working together, the paint, the stamps, the modeling paste, it all, I think, comes together to make an interesting background. And I'm just kind of randomly applying the modeling paste to the background through the stencil. I don't have any big plan. I always like to keep the stamping on top of the areas of color. I don't like to include stamping too far away from the edge of where I have the paint in the background. But for the modeling paste, I don't worry about that as much because you can't really see it if it goes off of the area of color because the background is white and so is the modeling paste. But in general, I feel like the modeling paste can go a little bit farther off of the edge than the stamping. I've tried stamping on areas that don't have color on them, and I never like the way that looks. And I'm just referring to using background stamps. And then also when I'm creating a background using stamping, I won't use an acrylic block. I use clear stamps mainly, and I'll just hold the stamp in my hand, and I try to use different parts of the stamp, so I'm not always using the exact same place on the stamp. Sometimes that doesn't matter because the whole stamp is the same, but sometimes the stamp will have some variations. So now the background is complete, and I know you can't see it on the video, but there's such a beautiful shimmer to the background. And now I'm arranging all of my shapes over the painted background. I'm using my T-square to make sure that everything is straight, and I repeat this process many times off camera. I just always want to make sure that nothing is crooked, because years ago I made so many layouts that had crooked elements that I had to go back and fix later on. So I really like to keep my T-square handy. I think that it's a great tool. And then I'm using ATG adhesive to attach those shapes down to the background, but I'll have to go back and add some wet glue because the modeling paste does not allow the ATG adhesive to attach well to the background. So wet glue will do the trick. But I do that off camera and only after I'm absolutely sure that I'm happy with where every single thing is on the layout. This is my photo. This was taken on Easter Sunday at my sister's house quite a few years ago now. I mounted the photo on some white cardstock, and then I mounted it again on a second round of white cardstock. I'm going to change that though, because I ended up thinking that I needed to bring a little bit of a darker color to around the photo so that it would stand out a little bit more. And then I wanted to create a title using one of the die cuts that's in the kit and also the word Easter. So I'm using these Heidi Swapp letters. I got these at the dollar store, and they're great because they have a resist to them. Perfect to use anything that has a resist with the Shimmerz paints. I use a beautiful Coloringz called Born to Be Blue to make the letters have some color to them. And then I also use some of the die cuts to the right of where I'm going to have my title cluster. I have some grass with flowers and this really cute pink tree that has flowers on it. And then I'm also going to use part of a die cut. So my title is going to read Hello Easter. The title said Hello Spring, so I cut off the word spring, but I am going to use the spring on another part of the layout. So first I cut the two apart, and then I use my scissors and I fussy cut out around some of the letters just so that the top looks like the bottom. And then I'm going to use the word spring on one of the shapes in the background. And like I said, I put the word hello with the word Easter. Now I'm going to use some of the items from the ephemera pack to embellish not just the shapes, but also around my photo and a couple of different places on the background. Since it was Easter, I thought these little carrots were just so adorable, super perfect. I have a sentiment that says spring is finally here, kind of on top of the photo. I have the word spring off to the right, some tulips, circle shape with some flowers on it. And I also wanted to use some of the single flowers to embellish around the photo. And then also on the top left-hand side, I wanted to balance out the flowers by the photo with those flowers at the top of the page. I also picked out one of the dots, which I just thought was so adorable. It's a little sun. You could see it. I have it right now on top of the pink tree, or kind of overlapping the pink tree, but I'm going to move that in a little while, and I like where I move it to. And then once I felt I was happy with everything on the layout, I used some adhesive and I attached everything down, including those letters at the bottom of the page. Now, this is where I decided that I wanted to add some of the same color that I used on the title to the mat around the photo. So I cut that short. It's so cringy watching me remove the paper from behind the photo. But I did use the same paper. I was able to tear it off without actually tearing the paper where you would see it. And so I added a couple of layers of this Coloringz, and it's such a beautiful color. And you can see with each layer, it just gets to be a deeper and darker shade of blue. So now it's dry and I'm layering my photo on top of it. And I do think that that blue border looks better, again, because it brings a little bit of attention to the photo where those two white mats didn't do that. So I wanted to move the sun to right on top of the word hello, but there was a little bit of a smudge that I got on the tree. So I fussy cut out a flower and I just stuck that there because I really liked the sun better where I have it now. I just think that it looks kind of more nestled in with the whole cluster there. And I like the little flower too. There was a really cool pack of puffy stickers in the kit this month, and I was able to use it to add a couple of really cute little embellishments to the page, kind of some finishing touches. I added some flowers next to the word spring and next to the title. There are some hearts on top of the photo and on top of the sentiment. And then I also added the words bloom and fresh by the tulips. And then I wanted to fill in a couple little spots in between the shapes. So I used one shape and I cut it into pieces. One I put on the right side, one I put on the left side. And I think that kind of finishes off those shapes and keeps there from being empty areas around them. So now I'm almost done, but I wanted to add some enamel dots. So I had some very, very teeny tiny pink enamel dots in my stash. So I added one of them to each of the flowers on the tree. And then after I added little enamel dots to the little flowers, I thought I should add some medium and large enamel dots to the larger flowers that were on the layout. So I added those to the single larger flowers. I also added them to that circle that's to the left of the photo. And then I put some tiny dots on the tiny little hearts that I have on the layout as well. Well, that wraps up this video. Here are some close-ups of the completed layout. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I wanted to point out that if you like the Shimmerz Color Kits collections, you can order a subscription, and the information that you need to do that is in the description box. This is the March kit, but there's an April kit that's coming out tomorrow, and I'm really excited to share the layouts that I made with that kit with you soon. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.